Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 9th meeting of the Social Security Committee for 2017. Good morning, Minister, and I hope you're not too out of breath in that respect. Could I remind everyone to turn off their mobile phones and other devices to silent mode so they don't disrupt the meeting. Apologies have been received from Mark Griffin, and we go on to agenda item 1. And I want to welcome Richard Leonard to the first meeting of this committee. And could I invite you, Richard, to declare any relevant interests?
Thanks very much, Convener. I don't have any relevant interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Item agenda 2 is decision in taking business in private, and item 6 to consider our approach to our timetable for the Social Security Bill and work programme. Does the committee agree to take this item in private? Yes. Thank you very much. Item 3, our next item, is the Child Poverty Bill. Today is the last of the committee's formal evidence sessions on the bill. Can I welcome Angela Constance, Cabinet Secretary for Communities, Social Security and Equalities, and also the team of officials who are Gillian Cross, Bill Team Leader, and Paul Tyler, Head of Social Security Strategy. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to, basically give an opening statement? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Convener, and very good morning to committee members. I'm grateful to you for inviting me to give evidence as part of your scrutiny of the Child Poverty Scotland Bill. And I want to start by extending my thanks to all of those who have given their time and their expertise during the development of this bill and have helped us get to this point. I hope to assure committee members this morning that the provisions set out in the bill provide the robust framework that we need for monitoring, measuring and reporting on child poverty, with 4 ambitious income targets at its very heart. As we are all aware, in 2015-16, poverty statistics published in March showed an increase in child poverty rates in Scotland. 26% of children in Scotland were living in relative poverty after housing costs. And I know that members will agree that these numbers are absolutely unacceptable. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has projected that child poverty at a UK level will increase further in the next few years, due in part to welfare changes imposed by the UK government. On top of their damaging programme of welfare cuts, the UK government announced in 2015 that they intended to repeal large parts of the Child Poverty Act 2010, including the 4 UK-wide income targets. And the Scottish Government was very vocal in its opposition to this. So with this bill, the Scottish Government is making a very clear statement. First, that child poverty is neither acceptable nor inevitable. And that's why our targets, set on an after-housing cost basis, are even more stretching than those in the original 2010 Act. And second, that income is central to poverty, or lack of income is central to poverty, a view that is strongly shared by our stakeholders, and that's why the 4 targets at the heart of the bill are focused on a range of aspects to do with low income. If passed by Parliament, the bill will establish Scotland as the only part of the UK to have statutory income targets. All of this is in stark contrast to the UK Government, who repealed the original income targets, abolished the Child Poverty Unit and removed the Child Poverty Remit from their Social Mobility and Child Poverty Commission. Our consultation on the bill was held between August and October last year, and it saw a broad range of individuals and organisations responding. Overwhelmingly, they supported the proposals for statutory income targets and for national and local reporting requirements. This has been complemented by our ongoing engagement with stakeholders, many of whom you've heard from during your own Stage 1 considerations. These stakeholders have warmly welcomed the bill and the reinstatement of income targets. They share our vision and bring with them their wealth of experience, and will be making use of it in the development of the associated delivery plans. On publication of the bill, Peter Kelly, Director of the Poverty Alliance, said, "The publication of this legislation is very welcome. Too many children in Scotland have their lives blighted both now and into their future as a result of poverty. By taking a more strategic approach and setting realistic targets, we can ensure that Scotland becomes a leader in tackling child poverty." So the bill Convener, will galvanise action across all government portfolios and will build on a range of work the Scottish Government already has underway to tackle poverty and inequality, and specifically it is made up of 3 key elements which I'll set out in turn. Firstly, it places a duty on Scottish ministers to meet 4 income targets by 2030. These targets are ambitious and provide a clear picture of the fairer Scotland that I'm sure we all want to see. And I know that one of the key issues raised in evidence has been around interim targets, and I'm open to this idea. I would be very interested to hear the committee's views on interim targets, and in particular how we ensure that any interim measure is realistic and achievable, and also effective in maintaining the momentum towards our ultimate aim of eradicating child poverty. Secondly, the bill places a duty on Scottish ministers to produce regular delivery plans, the first of which will be published by April 2018. Each delivery plan will set out clearly the measures that Scottish ministers will take to meet the child poverty targets. Ministers will also be required to report annually on progress towards meeting the targets. As part of the process of developing the delivery plan, we will build on the Child Poverty Measurement Framework. The framework was developed with a range of stakeholders and experts and covers the wide range of drivers and impacts that poverty has on the lives of children and their families. And we've committed to reviewing the framework with a view to including an updated version as part of the delivery plan that will be published in April next year. And I know that this subject has already come up in the committee's evidence sessions so far. In the session last week, panel members from Fife and Dundee were supportive of the overall focus on income measures, but highlighted the need for a wider dashboard of indicators. And I absolutely agree with that assessment, and that's why I think that the revised measurement framework will be crucial to the success of the delivery plan. And again, I'm keen to hear committee's views on that also. Finally, the bill places a duty on local authorities and health boards to produce annual local child poverty action reports, outlining the action that they have taken to reduce child poverty. I will also shortly be bringing forward proposals for an overarching socio-economic duty, which will require public bodies, including local authorities and health boards, to take socio-economic disadvantage into account when they're planning at a strategic level. The Child Poverty Bill duty will complement the socio-economic duty by requiring those bodies to set out the action they are taking at a local level to reduce child poverty. The local duty has been the subject of extensive discussions with a variety of stakeholders, including COSLA, NHS Health Scotland and a number of local authorities. It is clear from those discussions that there's a real appetite to involve community planning partnerships in the reporting and providing a joined-up local focus to tackling child poverty. And we've therefore been working to establish a reference group that will help to develop guidance for local authorities and health boards on the reporting duty. And finally, Convener, I believe that we must be ambitious for our children and our young people, and we have to take decisive action to end child poverty in our country. And I am confident that the targets and the robust framework underpinning them provide the focus that we need. I'm open to hear committee's views on how we can work together to improve this legislation, which I'm sure we can all agree is absolutely critical. And as ever, Convener, I'm always happy to be answering colleagues' questions and to have a constructive dialogue with the committee.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. If I could just start off, and thank you for your contribution. You mentioned about the difficulties, or ambition as well. The policy memorandum describes the targets in the bill as stretching and ambitious but realistic. How much of a challenge do you see reaching these targets, or will it be a challenge?
Yes, it will be a challenge. I believe the targets are achievable with the right focus, the right commitment, the right policies in place, as reflected in the delivery plan. It is not easy. It won't be easy. We know from organisations like the Institute of Fiscal Studies that child poverty is likely to rise and rise across the UK to over 30% in terms of relative child poverty. But given that we've had statutory income targets, And given that child poverty is currently on the increase and is predicted to increase, I feel it would be wholly unacceptable and a dereliction of duty to downgrade the importance of child poverty by not having statutory income targets. And of course, you know, while I'll point out that as a government we don't have all the resources or all the powers that I would like to see, nonetheless, as a country and I suppose as individuals, there isn't anything more important than our children than in our children's future. So our priority has to be eradicating child poverty. Thank
you very much. Cabinet Secretary Gordon Linter, want to come?
Yes, good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I would welcome your openness to considering interim targets, and you'll be aware of the evidence, as you've already said, that's been given to the committee on that matter. Now, you've referred to the Act as providing a robust framework, and I think it's probably not a source of disagreement that the Act itself doesn't provide an individual right of action that an individual could go to court to enforce it. There may be reasons for that, namely that it's a framework piece of legislation for government policy. Do you agree that in those circumstances it is even more important that targets be set that are interim so that progress can be reviewed, not necessarily just as a question of saying, have we met the targets or not, but also to review progress towards those targets and the approach being adopted? I think it was Naomi Eisenstadt who gave evidence to the committee that interim targets would and could be useful in that respect.
Yes, as indicated, Convener and Mr Linthurst, I am open to revisiting the issue of interim targets and coming back with proposals for stage 2. I think interim targets can be helpful in terms of keeping that momentum, ensuring progress has been made, you know, diminishing the risk of drift, helping us actually break down the overall ambition, because the overall ambition is to meet these very ambitious statutory income targets, eradicate child poverty, and interim targets, I suppose, help identify the milestones or the stepping stones or the interim steps to achieving that. I suppose what I would say in terms of my own thoughts about how matters around interim targets should be framed. They need to be realistic, they need to be achievable, and that they need to help us on our way. They need to be driven by evidence, and there's a crucial point here about data projections and the trajectory of child poverty. So I'm very open to the principle of the bill, the face of the bill, saying that we should have interim targets. But I think we would have to be careful about setting the interim target on the face of the bill, given that the work that we have commenced in terms of the work we need to do prior to the delivery plan about understanding the projections and the trajectory of child poverty at a Scottish level, that work is still ongoing.
And perhaps just to follow up on that, do you feel that the scrutiny provisions in the bill are sufficient, or as some witnesses have pointed out, there might be more appropriate or stricter scrutiny provisions at a parliamentary level? I'm not suggesting judicial scrutiny because there are different forms of scrutiny, but could the bill be improved in terms of how Parliament is involved in scrutiny of interim progress or the requirements set out in the bill, which you refer to as duties placed on the Scottish ministers?
I think the fact that there is annual reporting, we would lay that annual report to Parliament, and I suppose it would be up to Parliament, opposition parties, and indeed committee to make of any annual report what they wish, and to use the means that they have to hold the government to account. In terms of the production of annual reports, and indeed, you know, the overarching delivery plans. We want to be doing that in the style of co-production. So for the delivery plans, you know, we would want to produce draft delivery plans for consultation. I mean, annual reports will need to be done on an annual basis, so there's a regularity there. So, you know, we want to, we're bringing this agenda by not sweeping child poverty under the carpet. We're bringing this agenda to Parliament, to committee and to wider Civic Scotland, and I don't have any doubts that Parliament or committee will scrutinise this bill or how we are meeting the aims of this bill in due course.
Adam Tompkins.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I welcome this bill, and I'm interested in exploring with you ways in which we might be able to work to make it even stronger. In your opening remarks, you said that the bill has provisions for the monitoring, measuring and reporting of child poverty. And I agree with you that the monitoring, measuring and reporting of child poverty is important. But would you agree with me that even more important is tackling and reducing child poverty?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's a goal. Absolutely. But you need to have a process or and a way of tackling such a huge problem. So we need to have a mechanism that keeps us focused, a mechanism that evaluates throughout our journey what works, what's less effective, and where our priorities should be.
So tackling child poverty is even more important than monitoring, measuring it and reporting on it. But this bill doesn't contain any provisions, does it, that enable you or indeed require you, and indeed the Scottish ministers generally, to tackle or reduce child poverty? So that the targets are all focused on income. They're not focused on duties, statutory duties that you as Scottish ministers have to take in order to achieve the ambition of reducing child poverty in Scotland. Is that right?
I think there's two aspects to Mr Tompkins' questions. I would contend that, you know, Scottish ministers having a duty to monitor, measure and report on child poverty are very important foundations to achieving our ambitions. So this bill, I know it's described as a technical bill, a framework bill, but it is laying very important foundations. And while we all know as parliamentarians that legislating on its own is, you know, rarely in itself sufficient, and I think we're all, you know, mature enough as parliamentarians to agree that, but this bill puts, you know, the cornerstones in place. This is about getting the foundations right, and it does indeed place duties on ministers. The important thing about the targets, and I will speak a bit about policy and delivery plans, but the important issue about targets is that we have, you know, a small, selected, focused targets where, you know, there's very broad agreement about the importance of income, that, you know, poverty is defined in many ways. There are many, many aspects of poverty. There are multiple drivers, but at its core is lack of income. And of course, we can debate the issues around why, you know, poorer families have lower income. But at its core is that lack of income, and we need to be focused on that. But of course, the measurements, you know, are broader with the measurement framework. And, you know, we know that, you know, our work is placed in the wider context of the economy. None of us have a crystal ball about what will happen between now and 2030. I didn't want to mention the B word, but, you know, Brexit will unfold. So it's important that our delivery plans are flexible and responsive to changing needs. There are opportunities that we would have, I think, like the 210 UK Act, where it listed areas, you know, that could be covered. Again, I'm not adverse to the bill listing, you know, areas that the delivery plan should address or cover. Again, to be transparent with the committee, my only concern would be that that list would be too narrow when we want to be able to respond to the evidence and respond to emergent need.
It could be an indicative list, not an exhaustive list of matters that delivery plans must, by law, include. You'd be open to that?
It could be an exemplar, yeah.
Would you be open to going even further and to looking at adding to the bill targets in addition to income-related targets? So, for example, this is an issue I've explored with a number of witnesses, and John Dickey from Child Poverty Action Group said that he was enthusiastic about this, and others have echoed that. We all know that the First Minister has made it the defining mission of this government to close the attainment gap in Scottish schools, and we also all know that one of the many underlying drivers of poverty is educational underattainment. Would you be open to having some kind of duty added to the bill that ministers must take steps to close the attainment gap as a means of reducing and tackling child poverty in Scotland? And if not, why not?
Well, I mean, I can forgive Mr Tompkins for that question because Mr Tompkins wasn't around in the last Parliament, but there are some members on this committee who sat in the previous Education Committee in the last department and would have followed and indeed contributed to the passage of the Education Scotland Act 2016, which does indeed place duties on ministers and indeed local authorities to address and reduce the attainment gap, and a lot of that work that underpins how we're going to do that is in and around the National Improvement Framework. So I would contend that those duties already exist. And I suppose if I could lay out in a broader sense, the overarching duty, if you like, is going to be the socio-economic duty, and the four strands, underpinning that, or three strands that already exist in terms of the duties that ministers and local authorities have in terms of the Education Scotland Act, Community Empowerment Act, important, and the landmark Children and Young People Scotland Act. Local authorities and ministers have duties around there, not least for looked after children, and now the other cornerstone for that is the Child Poverty Bill.
Okay. And sorry, last question, if I may. That socio-economic duty that you've been talking about this morning, where is that coming? Is that coming in this bill, or is that coming in separate legislation?
That will come in separately. We will be bringing forward proposals about how we're going to do that shortly. Again, this goes back to the Scotland Act. So where it's a duty that lay dormant under the 210 UK Equalities Act. So it's, we now have some very discrete powers or potential powers as a result of the Scotland Act in and around equalities legislation. So we want to bring forward the socio-economic duty. We'll be doing that shortly, bringing forward a consultation because we want to ensure, and I think particularly for local authorities, that we proceed in a manner where duties are streamlined and that we're not overburdening people.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula McNeill.
Thank you. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. My questions follow on much of the same theme, because I heard you say that there would be a social economic duty which is to come later. What I'm a little bit concerned about is, while these are all principles I would fully support, and you said at the beginning that there's a need to focus, I would like the bill to be more focused on some of these issues contained within it, rather than being in different places. And I'm interested to whether you think there should in fact be a statutory duty to include in the delivery plan a requirement to take specific measures. Now, we all have different opinions about what specific measures might actually lift children out of poverty. But I feel that the bill would benefit if there was a much more powerful statutory duty to include in the delivery plan, which I think is probably the kind of operational side of the bill itself, and I would be interested to know what your view on that would be.
I understand the motivation of the question, but if we want to galvanise activity within government, out with government, if we want to be in a position to respond to changing economic circumstances, whether that's positive or negative economic circumstances, or indeed other big global events, we will need to be flexible. And while, you know, I think similarly to the 210 Child Poverty Act, that we can include, you know, things that should be covered, because there are commitments that we're not going to stray from. So we know, for example, that affordable housing has a contribution to make to all four indicators. That increasing, you know, the supply of affordable housing will help us, you know, address all of the four targets. We know that measures around, you know, targeting support for people that are unemployed, single parents, or have disability. We know, you know, there's a body of evidence about the contribution that childcare makes. So I just, you know, I think there are platforms that could be included as, you know, examples of what could be or what should be in the delivery plan. But it is really important that we are robust with our delivery plans and that we take an evidence-based approach, because some measures we know are effective, but they'll have an impact in the longer term. There are other measures that will have a more direct impact on changing the targets. But all of that, of course, is in the context of what's happening with welfare reform and the economy. And it's really important that, you know, if the bill is too prescriptive, that actually our response to child poverty will be less responsive and less flexible. And we want, through, you know, the Poverty and Inequality Commission, for those experts in the field to be informing and helping us, you know, develop the delivery plan.
Yes, but there's a danger it might not be prescriptive enough, so I take that point, which is why I'm interested in whether there should be a statutory duty for it, because the example that you give is in fact a target in itself to build 35,000 affordable houses, so that's a target in itself. And it's a measure that arguably, well, yes, of course, it makes a massive contribution, but it's not quantifiable. But there are measures where there's some evidence, for example, as other members have been pursuing in this committee, the £5 top-up and child benefit, there's quite widespread consensus that there would be specific ways that you could measure how you could take children out of poverty. So that's, I would have a concern that the bill would be too wide. But just following on from that, you talked about some discussion about local duty. Now, obviously, we've heard from local authorities who are doing really excellent work in Fife and Dundee, and in my home city of Glasgow. I've been talking to the local people there. What did you mean by that? And how do you see the relationship between the work that those local authorities are doing and what would be included in the delivery plan?
Okay, thanks for that. I mean, I think it is important to stress that this is a very focused bill, and the focus and purpose it has been overwhelmingly, you know, supported and welcomed by stakeholders. And of course, you know, issues in terms of housing and our targets in particular for social rent would, you know, have a very prominent role in any delivery plan. And actually, because, you know, one of the reasons, and again, you know, there's a reasonable body of evidence to support this. One of the reasons that while child poverty is way too high, that it's lower than the UK, and actually, if you take the 3-year average, it's lower, you know, relative child poverty in Scotland that is lower than any of the other home nations, and that's the contribution of affordable housing and our policies on that. But it is important, and again, I think this has come through in some of the evidence from stakeholders, that the bill isn't over-complicated. We need that focus and that mechanism to help us tackle a massive problem that costs the UK, in monetary terms, £29 billion, according to Joseph Rowntree Foundation. But we shouldn't make it unwieldy or unworkable. And that's very important when it comes to our partners and local government. So local government, along with our partners in health, will have a duty to produce reports about the progress that they're making locally. The duty to achieve the income targets will rest with Scottish ministers. And again, that's in the context of looking at the overall responsibilities that local authorities have in terms of reducing educational inequalities. Again, I think like as Naomi Eisenstadt said, we want local authorities to be reporting on their progress, but they should have the freedom to be able to do what works at a local level without that being prescribed from the top or indeed in the bill.
Thank you. Ben McPherson, you want to come in a supplementary on Polly McNeill's question?
It's in a similar theme, but the question itself.
Well, sorry, Alison Johnson is coming in the question. I'll put you down for the question. Thank you. Alison.
Thank you, Convener. Can I first of all focus on the issue of scrutiny again? The Child Poverty Action Group, in their evidence, speak of the need for independent scrutiny, and I'd just like to understand why the Poverty and Inequality Commission, mentioned in your own government's paper, your plan for a fairer Scotland, would they perhaps be a body who may provide that scrutiny? I mean, you've obviously not followed the blueprint set up by the UK government with their commission originally. I'm just wondering why that decision was made.
No, I mean, we haven't followed the blueprint that the UK government had originally followed. I think quite simply and quite bluntly, because I don't see any added advantage to that, in that, a different government of a different colour came in and, despite the UK-wide Commission being a statutory body, fundamentally changed its role and purpose. We've got a manifesto commitment to establish a Poverty and Inequality Commission. The chair of that commission will have to be independent. We, will be scrupulous in terms of identifying, individuals who, will be appointed on the basis of their expertise. They will have a role in advising ministers. Like other advisory, bodies or individuals, committee, will be able to engage with that body in the way that you've engaged with the poverty advisor. I was absolutely clear that I want the Poverty and Inequality Commission established so that it can help us develop the first delivery plan. They will have an important role in around annual reports. You would expect them to be very engaged in that process. But neither did I want to be too preemptive about making an earlier announcement around the Poverty and Inequality Commission, because I was conscious that there's stage 1 proceedings for this bill, but I was also conscious that in terms of Civic Scotland and indeed the Oxfam, were keen to pull together, their own thinking to inform that process as well.
So is it your view that the Poverty and Inequality Commission will be in a position to be truly independent and as critical as they need to be of government?
It will be full of independent-minded individuals. I mean, I suppose if it's appointed, it will be appointed by ministers, as is the norm with advisory bodies that advise the government. But I think we've got a good track record on appointing credible, independent individuals. In terms of Callie Lyle, the Race Equality Framework Advisor, Naomi Eisenstadt, the Poverty Advisor. So we've got a clear commitment to establish a Poverty and Inequality Commission, and that's a real opportunity for experts, including those with that lived experience of poverty, to be really advising government, helping us to, galvanise that cross-portfolio work, that Team Scotland approach to tackling child poverty, and, taking a real hard look at the evidence, because it's the evidence that should inform, what we do, when, and why.
The work on income maximisation, I think there's a lot of evidence to show that it has been very successful, healthier, wealthier children. I'll mention again. I'd just like to understand your views on how important that income maximisation work is in reducing child poverty, and whether you think there should be a provision in the bill to offer all parents or guardians access to income maximisation advice as a right.
I mean, I think certainly that's something that's been considered in terms of the Social Security Bill. In terms of, income maximisation clearly has a role to addressing poverty. We know that there are many benefits that are underclaimed. I think that's perhaps more an issue for pensioner poverty. I was once very struck by a presentation by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where they said if we could get all pensioners to claim what they were entitled to, we would, nearby eradicate pensioner poverty. I think the issue with child poverty is somewhat more complex in that quite often the poorer families, are indeed claiming what they're entitled to. The issue is often about that level of entitlement in terms of what they're actually entitled to as a family via tax credits.
Can I ask?
But sorry, forgive me, convener. I should have said in terms of, that indicative list or an example or. Of what, in the bill, if the bill's saying what should be covered in the delivery plan, I think there's a role for income maximisation, certainly.
Just finally, I find myself slightly at odds with Adam Tompkins' assertion that the Child Poverty Action Group were suggesting that educational attainment should be one of the measures, because their evidence is contrary to that view. But one thing they are clear about is, they're suggesting that we use social security powers to reduce child poverty, and Pauline McNeill mentioned in particular the £5 a week top up to child benefit. Do you have a view on that?
I have a view on both matters. Educational attainment is both a cause and a consequence of poverty, and indeed it's reflected in our current child poverty measurement framework, that broader dashboard in terms of, it covers issues to do with numeracy and literacy and, exam performance. There may be more sophisticated ways, other ways to connect the child poverty measurement framework with, for example, the National Improvement Framework in education, and we are committed to reviewing the measurement framework to ensure that we've got the right measurements. In terms of top up to child benefit, I'm on record numerous times as saying we should indeed be debating these matters. We should be debating the use and application of new social security powers. It's in short, my view of the current proposal to top up child benefit is that it's not a bad idea, but I don't think it's the best idea. And that goes back to, I think it was my exchange with Mark Griffin in Chamber a few weeks ago, that to top child benefit up by £5, an almost, not quite universal benefit, but it applies to people on incomes up to £50,000-60,000, that would cost per annum £250 million. But seven out of 10 of the children that would benefit from that wouldn't be children in poverty. And what we know from the history of child poverty in the UK is that there is indeed a place for targeted measures to increase income. And my concern about the child benefit top-up is that it's just to, the vast majority of the money wouldn't be directed at children that are currently living in poverty. But, we shouldn't be, we need to be thoroughly debating and discussing these matters.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Admiral Tompkins, did you want to come in and
Follow up
supplement?
on Alison Johnston's question about the Poverty and Inequality Commission. Is that going to be a statutory commission, or is it an ad hoc commission?
No, we don't have any plans to make it a statutory commission, just for the reasons that I'd outlined to Alison Johnston, that there was indeed, the UK body was indeed statutory, but I mean, it didn't stop radical changes being made to the body by a different government. And also in terms of timescales, if it to be a statutory body, it wouldn't be established in time for the publication of the first delivery plan, which has to be published next April.
Thank you.
Ruth Maguire.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I'd like to ask you about some local level stuff, if I might. And I know we've covered some of it. The local authorities and partner health boards are going to report annually on the activity that they're undertaking. And we've had quite a few calls in both written and oral evidence for there to be a duty on local partnerships to set out their plans on what they're going to do to tackle it in the future, as well as just reporting on what they've done. It was just to hear your views on that first.
Yeah, I mean, again, we looked very closely at this, and in terms of my dialogue with COSLA, it was certainly our shared instinct to be looking at, making duties applicable to community planning partnerships. However, I got very strong advice that was just not possible, and it's because community planning partnerships, unlike health boards or local authorities, are not kind of legally constituted bodies, and it's not the community planning partnerships that actually employ people. So, with a little bit of regret, we couldn't, really pursue that option, so that's why the reporting duty is on health boards and local authorities. They will need to exercise their duties in partnerships, and that inevitably actually brings in and involves community planning partnerships.
Thank you. We heard about lots of good work that's ongoing in local areas. One of the other concerns that was raised was about the availability of robust data to measure just how well the actions were, what impact they were having. I'd like to hear your view on that. I suppose I'd like to say as well that I think we want to be careful that looking for more and more robust data doesn't stop action. So it's not from that perspective, but just what's your opinion on that?
I agree, we need enough data to inform the action. We don't want to be tying everybody from government to local authority officers on the front line, generating data. So there needs to be a proportionate response, and it's more about the right data and the quality of data. And while some local authorities have reasonable data at a local level, there is an acceptance that they would prefer better local information, and that's something that we've given a commitment to work with them through the reference group that I referred to in my opening statement. We've also been doing some very interesting work around SIMD and how that work at a local level could be adapted to give us more insights into child poverty, and we did a bit of a pilot project around Orkney in terms of how we could use the analytics around SIMD to tell us more about child poverty in Orkney. That's maybe something we could share with committee if committee was interested.
Certainly sounds very interesting. Thank you.
Richard Leonard.
Thanks very much, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Really, just to continue on that theme, you mentioned about unclaimed benefits, and your estimation was that unclaimed benefits are more an issue for the pensioner population than the population as a whole, and that may be true. But as I understand it, in Glasgow, for example, there have been moves to put in place automatic free school meal entitlement. School clothing grants have been done on an automatic basis, and I think the figure I saw was that out of 25,000 eligible families, an additional 5,000 and more have now received benefits they are entitled to, or grants that they are entitled to that otherwise they wouldn't have got. And I think the barriers to families claiming were due to the complexity of the forms. Sometimes English wasn't a first language, and also a concern that they would lose out on other benefits. So do you see a role for that kind of automatic entitlement approach at either a local or I guess at a national level?
No, I do, and I don't demur. I hope I didn't give that impression from the importance of income maximisation for families. I just think in terms of how we maximise income for different groups, we actually need a different approach. And while, you know, it's always a good opportunity to have general income maximisation campaigns, but they always need a follow-up approach as well that's more targeted either to families in need or indeed to older people. Yes, I do think there's a space for measures that cut out bureaucracy or indeed stigma. There is indeed, for many families, you know, a stigma associated around, free school meals, school clothing grants, you know, attending a food bank and such like. So there is indeed, I don't think that level of detail is for the face of the bill, although you can encapsulate, the need for income maximisation measures in the bill to be reflected in delivery plans, and so there is a case for these types of initiatives either at a national or indeed a local level, and it is important, I think, that we aren't over-prescriptive with local government.
I wonder if perhaps you could develop that and shed some light on your current thinking about what you expect to be in those local delivery plans. What kind of measures are you looking at that you would expect a local authority, a local health board to report back on an annual basis?
Yeah, and we're certainly producing or will produce some guidance around what we expect from our partners in local government from the work that we're doing in the reference group. And the reference group will be made up of people appointed from a range of local authorities, because I'm conscious that the nature of child poverty will be very different in different parts of the country, and that's because although Scotland's a small country, local economies are very different and have different challenges and indeed have different strengths. So, we'll set out what we expect from local authorities, because there needs to be some parameters and consistency in reporting. But nonetheless, local authorities, need to have the space to be, as democratically elected bodies, to respond to the needs of their own communities.
And just very finally, and you would be expecting them to be taking action to tackle poverty and not simply counting the levels of poverty locally?
Yes, it's going to need all of us to take action to eradicate child poverty, but there's an important place for reporting because that's about the transparency and us creating a shared understanding about the scale and nature of the issue. We want to develop, and I give this as a personal commitment to committee, we want to develop, I think, more of a consensus around what works, so that tackling child poverty is an agenda that we all feel we have a contribution to make and that we can all work together on. And I have some experience of that given the work that I did a number of years ago around youth employment. Now, youth employment, when I became the Minister for Youth Employment, was 113,000, unemployed young Scots. It was at 25%. It was highly politicised. And we had a lot of very robust committee exchanges, parliamentary exchanges. But the work that was produced, particularly around developing Scotland's young workforce, we managed to build a consensus around that. And I don't know any party in this Parliament that isn't committed to the developing Scotland's young workforce agenda. And we've seen, you know, tremendous progress around youth employment. Obviously something that's hugely affected by the context of the economy, but Scotland now has the third lowest youth unemployment rate in Europe, and that's because we worked together, local, national government, third sector. We developed the shared understanding of the issue, a shared understanding of what worked, and I think went forward on a Team Scotland approach with all the arrows flying in the one direction, and that's what we're going to do in relation to child poverty.
Thank you. George Adam.
Yes, thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I brought up last week, it's following on from some of the information we've already discussed. There was, in Glasgow, there was a number of academics who sat there and fell out with one another in only a way academics could, in a very polite manner. And the one thing they did agree on was the fact that there wasn't enough data. You know, basically SIMD was the only show in town for them, and they said there was some flaws with that being the only thing available to them. Now, when we were talking to Dundee and Fife, that was particularly interesting because they actually said, although they're split by a spread of water, it might have been the Atlantic Ocean as far as they're concerned, because they didn't actually kind of exchange a lot of views with one another. And is that not the point of this whole bill, is actually gathering that data and focusing it on and making sure that, like Dundee and Fife actually said when they were here with each other last week, that gave them the opportunity to actually exchange ideas, and it was one of the first times that they'd done that. So is that not the whole point, where we can actually get you as a former councillor and myself as a former councillor know that there's great work happening in local authorities? It's just a case of maybe focusing the NHS boards and also the authorities to make sure that we actually share some of that expertise and try and make that difference.
I mean, I think it is an old cliche. I'm a former social worker, and in my profession we spoke at length about sharing best practice. We still you know, say that in many fields and sectors across the country, but I mean, it remains true. It should just not be insurmountable. We're a small country, and you know, where there are barriers to sharing good practice, we just have to find ways to deal with that. We've got, I think, a great unanimity or consensus around the importance of the 4 statutory income targets in terms of the measurement framework. You know, I think we need to involve people more in reviewing that, and the issue about data is that, in some areas there's a lack of Scottish data as well as local authority data, and that's about the trajectory of child poverty. So we know that across the UK, its trajectory as predicted here and now is that it's going to go up, but we want, to have a better handle on that at a Scottish level so that it informs our actions. But it's data with a purpose we want. We don't want to be creating, a complete, industry that generates data that nobody reads or nobody uses. It needs to be proportionate. And in terms of the work we'll do with the reference group that involves local authorities, involves the third sector as well, that we want to get the right, we're taking a hands-on approach to help local government, get the right analytics and the right data.
On that point, Cabinet Secretary, about data with a purpose, I was very interested in what you were talking about earlier on about the fact that targets alone in this bill will actually feed in to various bills that we've had in the past that have passed and bills that are coming in the future. And I found that, as you were saying, it was like a foundation stone for all that, and I found that really quite interesting, because one of the things that you're going to have to measure as well is the impact of legislation that comes from other places. Like Westminster, the child tax credit situation is a classic example of, obviously, that would be some of the data that would possibly come up in the information as well, because that will have effect on child poverty, because no woman worth her salt would fill in that form, even when you see the actual form in the so-called rape clause situation. So is it not a case that, yes, we can measure that data and it's all working together, but we still have that issue where there could be legislation, as you've mentioned earlier on, about the impact of welfare reform? We could still have that problem affecting us, and this will be probably a way we'll get the data and we can actually highlight it.
So, I mean, at a very basic level, it's about reporting measuring and adapting what we do. And there's a real role for the Poverty and Inequality Commission in that when they are supporting government to develop delivery plans based on evidence, a real core part of that is evaluating what we currently do as a government, existing policies. It's also about evaluating new policies, but they will also evaluate the UK-wide context and indeed the wider impact of the economy and welfare reform. And the challenge is immense. I don't believe it's insurmountable. I wouldn't be coming to Parliament with a child poverty bill if I didn't think we could do this or work together to achieve our ambition. But it is true that some of what we're doing in terms of mitigation is to stop things getting worse for people as opposed to spending a resource to make things better. But that scrutiny of existing and new policies will apply to the Scottish Government in the same way as that it can and should apply to the UK Government and also to local government. It's about what's effective, what's going to work. There is a substantial body of evidence there, but there are knowledge gaps and there's gaps in the data.
Jane McPherson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You spoke earlier about the complex nature of child poverty, but that it's principally based around monetary concerns, and that's why I support the holistic foundational focus of focusing on income targets within the wider context of the economy. I'd just like to ask around that in terms of delivery plans. We heard evidence from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that they supported that a new delivery plan be published early in the next and subsequent parliamentary terms rather than the end of them. And that was in order to help support accountability but also strategy within the parliamentary term. And as far as I can remember, they suggested a cyclical basis of delivery plans on perhaps a three-year cycle. I'd just be interested to get your thoughts on that in terms of the delivery plans being able to be flexible and responsive to need, as was discussed earlier, and also considering, as George Adam just mentioned, and you also mentioned in your opening remarks, the fact that delivery plans will need to consider the negative and prohibitive effect potentially of UK government policy.
I mean, in short, Convener, I've listened to the stage one evidence where I think it was the Joseph Rowntree Foundation was saying that the timing of the delivery plans should be tweaked. We'll listen to other people's views about that. I'm relaxed about that. I believe annual reporting is focused in terms of scrutiny and accountability and transparency, in terms of ensuring that the forefront of our minds and the political debate and our activities in Parliament, that we're always focused on child poverty and eradicating child poverty. I think there are debates about how what period should delivery plans cover. I mean, the existing child poverty strategy covers I've operated in a 3-year period. Some people say it needs to be a bit longer to demonstrate more change, bearing in mind that eradication of child poverty is indeed possible within a generation. The changes that we see on a year-to-year basis are more subtle, and some of of our own thinking and thinking we've seen from stakeholders is that a 3-year cycle tends to come bang in the middle of parliamentary cycles. So I'm quite relaxed about the timing of the delivery plans, but I do think they need to be long enough to give government as partners a run at it. So I think a 5-year period is about right, but as always we'll be listening closely to others.
Thank you.
Polly McNeil, you wanted to come back in on
Yeah,
an issue?
it was kind of a follow-on from Alison Johnson's question about automation of benefits, and in the context of Richard Leonard's question, which was around the work that's been done in Glasgow, where it does show that there's many unclaimed benefits, and that has made a dramatic difference because you can use the data. So anyone in housing benefit, for example, you know they have a certain entitlement, so you just send out the cheques. But given that, would it not make sense to look at bringing that duty also into the one they're talking about in the Social Security Bill, also into the Child Poverty Bill? I mean, given that the government, if the bill passes into law, would be required to do the first delivery plan in 2018, it would certainly bring that focus a bit sooner to the Parliament. It's just something I thought was worth considering.
I think the evidence around automation is really interesting, and it's great examples of what can be done at a pragmatic level that cuts through bureaucracy and gets to folk in need more quicker. But I suppose, I go back to my earlier comments, convener. This is a focused bill. I think the place for more detail around the opportunities around automation are actually for the delivery plan. And, it may be that there's a way of encapsulating in the bill that if the bill had pointers about what should be covered in a delivery plan, that's, encapsulating about something about modern, efficient approaches. I'm just genuinely concerned that if we are overly specific in the face of the bill, that the world around us will change before we know it, and we're stuck in ways that have become outdated. But I do genuinely think there's a great merit to more automated processes and that intelligent use of data.
Thank you very much.
Could I just follow up with the two questions which I had wanted to raise? One was on the back of Ruth Maguire and Richard Leonard's question about local authorities and health boards as well, and basically looking forward rather than looking backwards. You mentioned about the proposed requirement on local authorities and health boards to report on activity. Do you wonder if do you think that goes far enough, or if local partners should be required to also set out their own intended actions to tackle child poverty?
And I think bearing in mind the overall responsibilities and duties that local government have in terms of Children Young People Act, in terms of the Education Scotland Act, their responsibilities and approaches that they have at their disposal under community empowerment, I think we've got the right balance of duties and responsibilities in local authorities, because all of that will be encapsulated by the socio-economic duty. And, inevitably, it's an issue for the reference group and the guidance that, a progress report is both forward and backwards looking, and because it's evaluating evidence, it's at its core, evaluating what works.
Thank you for that. There's just one other small question which I was intended to come in on the back of George Adams, and you'd mentioned it yourself, the Poverty and Inequality Commission, and basically, could you perhaps clarify what the intended remit and role is for the Poverty and Equality Commission, and what its relationship is going to be with the current Ministerial Advisory Group?
Okay. I will be hoping to say more about the Poverty and Inequality Commission at some point in the near future. As I've indicated earlier in earlier responses, the Poverty and Inequality Commission is about advising ministers, using their expertise, helping ensure that cross-government connectivity and connecting us with the wider world and the wider evidence. We are giving great thought to the future of the Ministerial Advisory Group on child poverty. That group I've been engaging with prior to today, and as part of our work in preparation for the Child Poverty Bill, and that group will, as a minimum, certainly remain as the bill passes through Parliament and, it becomes bedded in. In terms of the future, we need to be, upfront and actively, question whether we will need both a poverty and inequality commission and a ministerial advisory group on child poverty. Now, that's not a debate or discussion that is resolved in terms of the here or now, but I'm advising committee that we're giving that some thought, because again, in the same way that you need, the right range of data, you need the right range of advisory groups and experts. We don't necessarily want, a cluttered landscape when we're actually trying to get real focus and real drive in this area.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and thank the officials for coming along as well. I know call this meeting to a close, and thank you very much, and we'll continue in private.